and first time here in Pasadena. I will tell you briefly a little bit about my background, and can you first of all tell me if the sound sounds okay? Yeah, good. So I grew up by a lake in Norway, and it was about to die from algae overgrowth. It was in the sort of 70s, 80s, and I think this actually is noisy, right? You really don't want to have kind of bad sound. Okay, how is this?
Just don't move your face.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm kind of quite animated with my face. Yeah. That's good. It's better because I don't know anything more irritating myself, so I have to go listen to some kind of extra noise. So the first image that you see here is actually I came back again after the 40 years to the same area for a project, and at the same lake. Where was I? I was at the blue-green algae. And when I grew up, that was very, very scary, of course. The thought that where we take the fresh water from, the drink water, and the fish, everything would die there. But now, you know how people are growing up with the whole idea that the planet is dying. It's extremely scary for young people to grow up now. I mean, in the 80s, I was also afraid of the atomic bomb when Russia invaded Afghanistan. And I went to school and said, oh my God, the Earth, it's going to be atomic war. But now it's just really devastating, this terrible to think about how people are growing up now, hey? Like you kids now, it can be really, really scary to think about these things. So I think, it's very, very, we need to stick together and, talk about it, give each other kind of also some kind of hope, that it's possible. I want to kind of continue on that one, but at the moment, early on, I studied to become a marine biologist. For as I mentioned, I grew up by a lake. I also spent a lot of the summers by the sea, and I spent more time in water and around water than above, actually, and always been totally fascinated with what's happening in areas we don't know about. So I studied chemistry, biochemistry, a lot of mathematics, but unfortunately I got this kind of eczema in the organic chemistry lab. I guess quite a few of you have been through the organic chemistry lab here in the room, and it's quite poisonous. So I developed this eczema to change my studies, slightly sort of drifting around, and I started to study art and in London after a year at Falmouth. And it started kind of, I love drawing. I love making things, making objects, making sculptures. But it didn't make sense anymore for me to keep doing this, to create objects. So I wanted to work with immaterial material. And I think it was already in 1992. I was around with my cassette player, recording around the Thames with sound. Then I worked with light and sound. And sound is a very physical material, though it doesn't take up any kind of space. So now, what is it, 30 years, not 40, 30 years later, my studio is still like, I have everything in 40 square meters and not kind of hangars of sculptures that I don't know what to do with, and landfill, So, of course, my concern has always been there in how we are treating the planet, and the curiosity was great to hear Noah Bach to. I have also really this fascination of this, which we can't explain, or that I will say that other creatures can perceive. For example, like the bats. That we know that bats make echolocation sound in inaudible range for us. No. But we can slow it down, and we can hear it. We just bring it into audible range for us. And there's also light frequencies we can't see. So I was doing a project recently where I was trying to find rats, because I wanted to record the ultrasound range of rats, because they call for their mates in ultrasound range, about 30,000 hertz. but I couldn't find them, so then I used like an infrared camera to find them. And some creatures can see in infrared, we can't, and or in ultraviolet light, different spectra. We are also fascinating sensors ourselves, and sometimes I think we forget that also, But this one here, this bat, is a bulldog bat I recorded off the coast of Panama from a boat. It was fishing. So you see this bulldog bat is actually echolocating down towards the surface, and it senses the slight vibrations in the water surface, and it grabs the fish. It's totally fascinating to me, because at the time I was working on an 16-channel installation for an exhibition in MoMA. And I was working with sounds coming, echolocation from dolphins and sounds from fish from underneath the surface, and then bats from above surface. And this particular bat is actually going through the surface. So it's like perfect for me to kind of make this kind of spherical installation. And then just before I was doing that installation, I met this bat, and it was just going through the surface. Because I like this kind of differences, the surface tension. It's very interesting. We can kind of, I won't go. That's a project I'm working on now. But I will play you how this sounds like when it's stretched in time. And unfortunately, you have to stretch time afterwards. It would be so fantastic if we could stretch time in real time. Wouldn't it be great? Because you could just look inside, and or stay, as long as you want, let go and go back. I would love that. But in real time, I can frequency change. I'll play you then a little bit of that. Here it's slowed down 10 and 20 times. So you can even hear the slow down water there, right? And that was when it was going through the water. I use different tools for this. You can actually get some that you can attach to your phone or to your kind of iPad or whatever. Those things. But I have a friend now, becoming kind of talking to him all the time, at an engineer in Sweden, and he is okay. You wanted to? It's called Lars Pettersson, and he builds these. These are mainly made for bat scientists that works with bats. You can actually also then record onto it. It can be not so easy to record onto a normal audio recorder because you can't get the sample rates, not the frequency high enough on normal recording equipment. Though my main tool is the hydrophones. Like I mentioned, all this underwater stuff. I use these two as my main tool. You see there's another pair behind there. They are based on the piezo technology, like how you are also using the same technology for contact microphones. And you might know how that works, little crystals that get into motion. But I also like to use the tools where they're not supposed to be used, and this is inside of an ant's nest, because I was out actually recording with now my good friend Chris Watson and Mike Harding in Touch, the label I work with in London, and we had one each, and we were listening. That was about 15 years ago. And this was a recent shot, but then you can really start. You hear the vibrations in the ant's nest, and you can put them into wood. You can hear a woodpecker up in the top of the tree, and insects, and use it for all sorts. Putting it inside of ice, in your compost. One project I worked quite a few different rivers where I followed from the source to the mouth. And I was following a river from the border of Russia. Yeah, actually, that was the first time I heard an underwater insect was in a river in Russia. But I was following a river from the border of Scotland to the North Sea, and I went to a lab in Newcastle, and I had that idea at that point, because they count underwater insects to say something about how the health of a body of water is doing, which insects are present. So then I suggested, what if I kind of could listen and find the sound of each of these insects, and then I could actually listen to the health of a river by hearing, I hear that insect, or I hear this insect. So, but a particular one that you find many places is a back swimmer. This is from another river project in Sweden. I was also working with the same idea that you could listen to the underwater insects. I will play you. Now there will be 3 recordings that kind of slides into each other. First one is with one, and they seem to kind of go into choirs. And they join in together like crickets do. They sound a bit like crickets. They do stridulation. They rub body parts together. So let me play that for you. Glasses, my aim. It's a bit useless. Sometimes our senses are kind of failing a little bit. So here's first one. And some other species coming in. So as you can hear, there's quite a variety of different, underwater beetles and insects. I applied the same kind of idea that you could listen to the health of a body of water to a project I'm working on with the TBA 21 Academy. And I've been 4 years resident on this boat, Dardanella, traveling around on the Mesoamerican reef, but this is particular one is from Dominican Republic at the Silverbank, and we were looking at and listening into whether the fishing that was going on there had any influence on the growing back of coral. The coral there died out in the 80s from this white band disease that came in, a bacterial infection that affected quite a lot of the coral, and it's really having a hard time growing back because all of the parrotfish is fished up. So there is nobody to clean the algae away. And we did find, I then listen different distances from the coral, from the reefs, and see whether I can say something. Of course, I can't say anything kind of very saying it's like this, it's like that, but you can look at like tendencies, which seemed to kind of be right. And I see now later on, a lot of people are suggesting that. But I mean, that was quite some year ago. And as it is saying in the program, I will talk a little bit more about this particular project, Spring Bloom in the Marginal Ice Zone. And I was invited to a project called Dark Ecology by Sonic Acts Festival in Amsterdam. And Hilde Meti, which is curator in the north of Norway, on the border to Russia, up to have a field trip up to Nikko and up at Kirkenes, over the border between Russia and Norway. And at that point, it was also said that, the Prime Minister, Erna Solberg, in the Norwegian government, she said, well, the ice edge is moving north. So, underlying, we can drill for oil further north, no? And because there is a restriction of how close you can be to the ice edge. But when I was up there, and I could see the eagerness to kind of, development is happening, opening the northeast passage to go to Asia as well. There's a fast way to go to China that way, around the whole trade route there. So I became really curious to see what is this? Was this ice edge? Because it sounds like a line, and it can't be that simple, I thought. So I was then invited. It all came a little bit sort of coincidence, but I was then invited on a trip to the North Pole. So I said, great, I'd love to go and have some kind of feeling of what is this sea ice, and also the possibility to record under the sea ice and inside of the ice itself. It was a very noisy place. It looks really beautiful, right? It looks like wow, it's really quiet. It looks like, but it was not true at all, because on the actual geographical North Pole that day, there was a lot of people cheering and champagne and shouting a lot, and they wouldn't shut up. And closer to the camp, on the ice itself, there is generators all the time. And I couldn't walk far enough away. I had somebody with me with a gun, against the, in case of polar bear. But I walked as fast as I could away, but still, because, sound travels underwater almost 5 times faster than in air. It's an excellent medium for sound travels. So you need to go really, really, really far away to not pick up that human-created sound. And it's one of my major problems, of course. If I don't want human-created sound in my recording, there's hardly anywhere on the planet and no time of day. There might be a little gap of a couple of hours when most people are sleeping, but it's very, very hard to find. Just the year later, I went with this Helmer Hansen research ship from the university in Tromsø. I had been on a research trip in this area about 10 years earlier. This year, there was no ice where it was expected to be. No, it was pretty devastating actually to be witnessing this. And do you see there are ice, and this is it's the ice zone. It's not ice edge, of course there isn't. But this typical kind of media, they want to kind of make things kind of very simplistic, and it's never so simplistic. So we have the whole area, which is a very important area for, especially in the spring bloom, where you have phytoplankton that are doing the photosynthesis, and then you have the zooplankton that are eating the phytoplankton, and they are pooing, and this is dropping down to the benthic layers, and they're dying, and they're falling down to the benthic layers and get stored. And it's the most important carbon dioxide sink we have. It's super important. And what will happen when there is no more ice? You can see that there is areas, it's very fragmented ice. you have the albedo effect, you know, the reflecting of the light, which is also extremely important. We're not just sucking in all the energy from the sun, getting stored in the water, and it's just accelerating the process. I guess you guys, you know all of this. Here is, you see the polar bear? He'd just been eating a seal, and it was just the intestines that were left, and some seagulls were eating the intestines. I didn't like the intestines. I was recording in this area. It was hard to get off the mothership, but we were recording here, and I heard this kind of beautiful sounds. It looked sound. Can you guess what it is? It's kind of sound underwater. It's got its seals, you know. You might have heard seal recordings from underwater before, but at that point I had never experienced it live. Right? So I didn't know what it was. It was like intense, this kind of high frequency dropping sound. But then suddenly it disappeared, and right in front of me was this big seal head out of the water. And it was like looking at me, and it was quiet on my hydrophones. And then it disappeared again and started. So I will play you a little example of what it sounded like in that location there. Oops. Let me see. So you can imagine it's not exactly what you expect this big seal to make that type of sound. But of course there is a lot of creatures that are depending on sound underwater, and they need it to meet each other. I mean, this is a pike, and this is one I still haven't been able to record. But I have recorded a lot of cod and sei and the different, in perch, different species, many different species of fish. So I will play you how seide in Norwegian, where it's like Norwegian, it's not quite Norwegian pollock, but similar species. Okay, so it was going to after it was following some fish, small fish. So it was in the action of hunting. So I don't believe that it's only about mating. That is often explained as it's about mating, but I think it has much more other functions, the sound making. Okay, so this is also a fish, and it's pretty different from this one kind of cod fish family that I just played. And the next one now, it only appeared around full moon. Because I mean, the fish, you know, they are very depending on, you know, the moon, the tide, how it pulls of the water. So to me, I was looking around if there was human beings making that sound, but you know, there was because that project actually was not in the sea ice. This was where the water gets higher and it gets flooded in the south of Thailand. And I was working with local fishermen there, and he knew exactly the fish is here, and they were really also very used to listen to the fish. And you listen to the body of the inside of the boat itself, you know. And when you concentrate, you can also listen down in the boat, and you might, you know, as you know, yeah, I know you were sailing, and so I'm surely you have heard whales and you heard crackling. Crackling, I think, is the combination. It is both snapping shrimp that is explained as. It is snapping shrimp, but it's not only snapping shrimp. It's also barnacles, it's other crustaceans. And for me, it's an ongoing process to figure out what that sound actually is. And I think it's a combination of many different sounds. It's not always, I hear it explained, oh, it's snapping shrimp, oh, it's snapping shrimp. I know there's hundreds of species of snapping shrimp, but it's also barnacles, other species that makes these kind of crackling, and it gives an area life that I can hear. There's very much life there. The depth, I don't know how I'm doing for time. You have to kind of keep me because I can talk for hours. In my experience of recording, I always have 2 or more hydrophones to say something about direction. This way, but more importantly, I think it's the different depths. So I always have like the hydrophones of 4 or more hydrophones at different depths, because the salinity, you know, the pressure, the temperature at different depths will also influence how the sound moves. And fish and crustaceans and mammals underwater, I believe, orientate themselves accordingly to this environment of sound, of pressure, of current, you know. And it becomes this kind of invisible, and audible and sense-able landscape, you know. But I've also tried different ways of making the hydrophone more directional, or record together with Tony Myatt. This is a prototype that my professor Tony Myatt in Surrey University in Guildford made. There's 12 hydrophones, so we're kind of recording in the idea of a sound field microphone for air, that you record a B format files that can be played back in a spherical situation, in an ambisonic setup. And when I'll just show you a couple of examples of how I am presenting the work. This particular work, Spring Bloom in the Marginal Ice Zone, was in about a month. I was sitting there for about a week, working the material into the existing environment of boats and different weather, you know, high frequency wheels, you know, the sound of wheels on water when it's wet is very different than when it's dry, you know. The sound in the environment changes a lot, so I try to always work with the acoustics of the space where I'm installing. So I want to work with the space and really not against it. Though slightly different here in Toronto, where this was called Spring Bloom in the Marginal Ice Zone, from the Barents Sea to Lake Ontario, where the speakers were kind of, you know, the sound kind of, taken from the sea and presented in this very toxic area. It was a project that was there last year. In New York City, and at Manhattan, in Park Avenue Tunnel, I did this project called Dive, where I had 8 underwater sound environments all through the tunnel. So it's normally a car tunnel, but you could enter into it through the shallow water, into the deeper and deeper, colder underwater environments as you went through the tunnel. So we had sections of 8 and 2 subs, 8 and 2 subs in these sort of ambisonic setups all through the tunnel at different stations. It was also a collaboration with Tony Mayet. Of course, to make this into a release or to spread it around, I mean, one reason for me to work with sound is also that it can spread to many people, and it's excellent for radio, you know. And I work with Touch, that has an international distribution network, so you tend to kind of meet more people than you do with in a white cube situation. This is the kind of stereo version of the installation, and I do sort of limited releases where I can release stuff in higher resolution, because I like higher resolution and better quality. You can listen to stuff on Bandcamp, or of course my website. So now it's a question for time. Is it how hungry are you? You want to have lunch, don't you? Okay, right. So then I have a little time to play you a little bit more sound here. First, I want to play this because it's just fantastic. This is a shoal of fish, and it's unbelievable. It's just like, it's a straight recording, and it's a shoal of fish. A school. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, was it not so much sound there? Yeah, I don't know what's going on about that actually. Let me do a test. Okay, I'm just gonna moving it a little bit here. Yeah. So I can move it around in the space. I mean, for me, it's fascinating that this is actually just straight for a recording. It sounds like a collage, you know, but this says to me that the fish are communicating with each other in the shoal. You know, they are maybe defining the space around themselves through listening to each other, you know, as well. And they're not just calling for a mate here, you know. That would be, you know, this is something more complex, I think. So I'm going to play a little part of the Spring Bloom for you. Okay, here it goes.